If you study old survival manuals, wartime home guides, and pre-antibiotic medical thinking, one pattern keeps resurfacing. People were obsessed with night air, not in a superstitious way, but in a disciplined, repeatable practice tied directly to lung health. This wasn't folklore. It was a rule followed in farmhouses, military barracks, frontier cabins, and urban tenements alike. It was simple, enforced nightly, and quietly effective. This is the bedtime air rule, and it was one of the most reliable ways people kept their lungs clear without medicine. This rule was about controlled exposure, not comfort. The rule was never sleep cold or freeze yourself for health. It was about deliberate air exchange at bedtime. Windows were opened at a fixed time before sleep, usually 15 to 30 minutes, regardless of season. The goal was to flush stagnant indoor air and replace it with cooler, oxygen-rich outside air before the body entered deep rest. People understood, even without modern terminology, that stale air thickened the chest and encouraged congestion. In practice, a household would crack a window or vent while bedding was prepared. Blankets stayed folded during this period, so they didn't trap warm, moist air. Only after the room fully changed over did bedding go on the bed. This ensured that the lungs were not breathing recycled air loaded with carbon dioxide, moisture, smoke residue, and pathogens accumulated throughout the day. Cold air at night was treated as a tool, not a threat. Historical sources make it clear that night air wasn't feared by those who followed the rule. It was respected. Cool air was believed to tighten lung tissue slightly, reducing inflammation and calming overworked airways. This mattered in eras when coal smoke, wood ash, and dust were unavoidable daily exposures. Folks with chronic coughs, winter chest tightness, or those pesky recurring infections were often told to sleep in rooms that were cooler than the rest of the house, as long as the air was fresh. Heavy bedding, made up for the lower temperature, while the lungs got a real benefit from breathing in cleaner air. The mistake people made back then, and honestly still do, was sealing up rooms to keep in the warmth, which just trapped in moisture and all sorts of irritants. Moisture control was, pretty central to clearing out the lungs. One of the least talked about parts of this whole rule is managing humidity. Old homes, they were a lot damper than what we're used to nowadays. Breath, cooking steam, wet clothes, even houseplants. All that stuff added to the indoor moisture. At night, when folks shut the windows, that moisture would just condense and hang around right where you breathe. By swapping out the air before bedtime, that extra humidity dropped down. Drier air, you see, cut back on mucus production in the lungs and sinuses. This wasn't just some theory either. People noticed that chest congestion eased up on nights when rooms were aired outright. Morning coughing fits got less common, especially for kids and older folks. A practical example of this old wisdom still applies today. If you're living in a modern, tightly sealed house and wake up with a scratchy throat or that heavy feeling in your chest, here's a simple fix. Just open your bedroom window for about 20 minutes before you go to bed and keep your bedding off the mattress during that time. That pretty much recreates the old practice, almost exactly. Now, sleeping position worked hand in hand with the air rule. Folks rarely practiced the bedtime air rule all by itself. It was usually paired with a slight elevation of the upper body. Even just one folded blanket under the head of the mattress was pretty common. That fresh air, combined with elevation, helped drain the lungs overnight. It cut down on mucus pooling, which, honestly, was a major reason for those morning coughs. People found that when they skipped either step, those old symptoms would come right back. Fresh air without elevation helped, sure, but not completely. Elevation without the fresh air might reduce reflux, but it sure didn't clear the chest. When you did both together, though, they worked as a real system. You can apply this now by elevating your pillow setup slightly after airing the room. The goal isn't comfort, it's alignment. The airway stays open, breathing deepens, and lungs clear more efficiently during sleep cycles. Contrary to modern assumptions, windows were not always left open all night. In extreme cold or storm conditions, they were often closed once the air exchange was complete. What mattered was the reset before sleep, not constant exposure. This is critical for understanding the rule correctly. People weren't reckless. They understood that overcooling stressed the body. The rule was precise. Air the room. Reset the atmosphere. Sleep warm. This makes the practice adaptable even in harsh climates. 15 minutes of full air exchange can, dramatically improve air quality without risking hypothermia or discomfort. Now, this rule was enforced hardest during illness recovery. Sick rooms were aired multiple times daily, and the final airing always happened before sleep. Folks believed this helped prevent the lungs from, working against themselves overnight. Caregivers noticed that fevers broke more cleanly, and breathing seemed to ease up faster when those night air routines were followed strictly. Interestingly enough, this lines up with what we now know about oxygenation and immune efficiency during sleep. But the people practicing it back then didn't need any scientific validation. They just saw results. For anyone studying self-reliance or historical survival, this rule serves as a reminder that back in the day, health maintenance depended on systems, not pills. It took discipline, observation, and a whole lot of consistency. And in situations where medicine is scarce, compromised, or just plain unavailable, air quality becomes your frontline defense all over again. Even today, this rule offers value. Modern homes, trap pollutants from furniture, electronics, cleaning chemicals, and synthetic fabrics. Nighttime air exchange, honestly, remains one of the simplest ways to reduce respiratory strain without equipment or cost. This wasn't folklore, it was a standard of living. The bedtime air rule persisted across cultures because it worked. It didn't promise miracles. It delivered reliability, clearer lungs, fewer night coughs, better sleep, stronger recovery. If you study the past seriously, you learn that the most effective practices were often the quiet ones that never made headlines. This was one of them. If you value this kind of grounded, historically accurate knowledge, go ahead and subscribe to Warfield Prepper Chronicles. Share this with others who care about real-world survival wisdom and forgotten systems that still work today.